Golf Central on YouTube is brought to you by the new Chrome Tour golf ball from Callaway.
Sports, movies, music built around stars. All the brand marketing experts could not concoct this. One college kid from the heartland with a ponytail, range to 30 feet, bag full of no-look passes. It began with, hey, have you seen that basketball player from Iowa? And suddenly people could not look away. She wouldn't let him. In the early stages of doing for her game what Magic and Bird did for pro ball in the early 80s. Caitlin Clark effect is real. Brought her skills to the golf course today. And here's some of the hard numbers. When her Hawkeyes played in the NCAA championship game in April, didn't win, the ball game drew 19 million viewers, more than the men's title game. Audience for the WNBA draft up more than fivefold, and interest in the WNBA went up about 30% in comparison to last year. So now we're pleased to welcome Dom Chu. He's the senior markets correspondent for CNBC and a lover of golf. Dom, thanks for being with us. So how would you assess the impact that Caitlin Clark has had and continues to have on women's sports in 2024?
It's not just women's sports, right, Rich? It's just sports in general. I mean, it's a generational impact that we're witnessing right now. And that's the reason why so many millions of people have tuned in to just catch a glimpse. Even if you're not a diehard women's basketball fan, you just want to be in the ecosystem because you kind of feel like you're watching history unfold. And that kind of a feel is what's driving so much of the positivity around the women's basketball game. And of course, that's carrying through to the Gainbridge and her participation in the ANNIKA at this penultimate event of the LPGA season. The great part about this whole story is that it is a rising tide, if you will, that lifts pretty much every single boat out there. We're not just talking about a basketball talent, but somebody who is elevating the visibility of women in sports, in business, and just about everywhere else out there. And, you know, Rich, you mentioned the influence of Magic and Larry Bird back in the day. I mean, this is also akin to kind of what's happened in the heyday of basketball not too long ago with the late, great Kobe Bryant and LeBron James, who's still kicking right now and playing some great basketball. I would put Caitlin Clark's influence on the WNBA in the same kind of category that we saw with the likes of Kobe Bryant and that we're still seeing with LeBron James. This is a massive, massive influence, and it's great not just for basketball, obviously her main sport, but even with her amateur participation in golf. It's akin to Steph Curry. Steph Curry may be a more accomplished amateur golfer than Caitlin Clark, but she's got a great swing. I saw some of the highlights this morning as well, and I think she's got a lot of runway for these celebrity pro-am events.
Dom, I mentioned the 2024 women's NCAA basketball tournament had higher viewership numbers than the men's, but the media rights deal for the women's tournament was for $6.5 million as opposed to $873 million for the men. Similar gap exists in other sports and professional leagues. What's responsible for this gap, and what would it take for businesses to change their approach?
I mean, the responsibility goes into any number of points, but what it comes down to for media in general is you want eyeballs. You want people watching your content. You want people involved. You want fans buying the merchandise, participating, going to events. And for better or worse, what that does is it takes time. Now, in the early days of the NBA or the legacy leagues that were there, we didn't see the kind of adoption, the type of viewership on a percentage basis with American media that we do for basketball in the NBA right now. What we do see is a kickstart that's happening over the last couple of years with these great young talents coming on, and Caitlin Clark is just the latest one. When you look at the way that people pay for the media rights, and when people pay to actually consume the media content of these types of sports leagues, it comes down to having more and more people. Right now, what you have is a situation where that gap exists because not as many people have tuned in the past. You have a massive data point in what happened over the last year with regard to viewership at the collegiate level and at the WNBA level as well. If it's not just 1 year, if you can show corporate sponsors and media participants and content creators that you can make this about more than just one season, that it carries into 2 or 3 or 5 or 6, all of a sudden the money starts coming in because, let's be honest, the more people who consume it, the more it's valuable to advertisers. And at the end of the day, when you grow that kind of total addressable market, that's what's ultimately going to close that gap for the women's game. We're seeing it in other sports as well. Look at the LPGA and the purse size that we've seen elevated over the course of the last 10 years there. It's still got a long way to go to catch up with the men, but that gap is shrinking. The trend is in the right direction. And if Caitlin Clark and the rest of the young talent in the WNBA, the ones who are coming up from the NCAA, can keep that trend going, you could start to see that gap narrow significantly in the years to come, Rich.
I mentioned some of the other women's basketball giants through the years. There have been players who arrived at the professional ranks who were at least as good and maybe better, frankly, than Caitlin Clark. No disrespect, thinking about Sue Bird, Diana Taurasi. So why now? Why Caitlin Clark and why not previously Lisa Leslie or Sue Bird?
It's a mix of a number of factors, but what happens right now is, first of all, the record that she broke for men and women at the collegiate level was a massive springboard to this fame that she has right now. The other thing, too, and this is an interesting kind of debatable point that I'll make here, is I believe that technology and media consumption trends are behind the surge that we've seen with just Caitlin Clark specifically. She came about at the right time. We have a massive amount of focus now on social media. Technology has put a smartphone in almost everyone's hand that really wants one. And for that reason, they can consume media and spread media a lot different than they could back in the days when some of these other players were out there. Technology was still a factor then, but you don't have the viral ability to create content like you do right now. So there are platforms out there that can spread this kind of highlight reel footage, this kind of great creator content that targets folks like Caitlin Clark because she is such a great generational talent. Could she be better than some of the ones that you mentioned before, Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird? Maybe, maybe not. It's very early in her pro career. But because of the way that we consume media now, I mean, when I was growing up, it was like appointment television. If I wanted to watch that NBA or WNBA or PGA or LPGA event, I had to look at my calendar, look at my watch, go in front of my TV, and then sit there and watch something, or maybe go to a bar at best. Now I have an iPad, I've got a phone, I can consume this stuff anywhere. So when you have that kind of a media environment, it is a lot easier for people to latch onto you because they can access you in some way from all of their different devices.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Let's go back to golf. What would it take for the LPGA to achieve the kind of breakthrough that the WNBA is experiencing at the moment?
I mean, I think you're getting a lot of that right now already. I mean, the #1 player in the world is Nelly Korda. She has brought a lot of female attention into the game. She's brought a lot of just overall attention from everybody into the game. The world's #1 player had a banner year, a massive season. The haul of trophies and everything else, the wins that have been racked up by folks like Nelly Korda and others are what it's going to take to kind of get people to focus more on the game for the women's side of things. Now, for the men and women overall, for golf in general, it is about trying to create some of those connections with fans that get them more involved, that want to keep them sticky to the environment. And what you are seeing is, aside from the play itself, right, that Nelly Korda, the top men's players in the world, accomplish, it's also about how much they can kind of reach their fans through those same social media channels. It's a huge part of the story. You know, I follow Max Homa on Twitter, right? And that guy creates some great content. I'm always engaged with it. I always like seeing what's going on. If you can get more people to want to be part of that entire sphere, that is the LPGA and PGA tours, that is ultimately how you get people more involved. And by the way, the game got a huge boost in the wake of COVID and the pandemic. More people are playing golf than ever have in America. If you can keep that going, that's also going to make that pie that much bigger going down the line.